Started. There we go. Well, welcome everybody to the September Water Availability Task Force meeting. I know there's been a few recent changes here in the facilitation side from us at CWCB. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Sam Stein, and I'll be helping facilitate this meeting here today. And Tracy will still be facilitating these meetings from the DWR side. But just wanted to introduce myself and everyone who's on this call, if you wouldn't mind putting your name and affiliation in the chat as you jump in, just so we know who attended. I think that's kind of just the intro business we have. Does anyone have an announcements before we get started? If so, feel free to raise your hand or just jump in. Doesn't look like we have any, so I guess we'll just turn it over and start out with the report from the state climatologist. Just not sure who's presenting on your end.
That's me, Becky.
Okay, Becky, awesome. Great to see you.
Although you caught me off guard. I wasn't going to be ready for like another couple of minutes here.
Sorry about that. Went through really quickly. Didn't have a ton to announce yet this morning. We've got an exciting program for everyone today, starting with you, and obviously the report out from NRCS, and then we've got a presentation on the turf replacement program today. So
I'm almost, yeah. So I was waiting for a couple maps that didn't come in, but I can get them updated. So let me move this over here. This one's a fun one. I get right down to the wire on finishing this presentation.
You want me to go first, Becky?
I got it already. I'm good.
Okay.
But thank you, Brian.
And I guess should probably stop sharing so you're able to share when you're good to go.
Sounds good. Let me put this on presentation. And does everything look okay?
Yep, looks great to me.
All right, great. Well, thanks everybody. It's great to be here and going to go over some of the climate, water, and drought conditions that we've seen around the state for the summer and more recently. For those of you who don't know, I am Becky Bollinger, and I'm the assistant state climatologist at the Colorado Climate Center, and we usually rotate who presents. So I get this month, yay. What we're first going to do is kind of look at what really happened over the summer and some of the fun facts there, and then talk a little bit about what's been happening in September so far. So this is a graph that shows the precipitation ranks for the state. This is a NOAA, National Centers for Environmental Information product, statewide precipitation for the June, July, August time period. And I've highlighted here 2022, and you can see that it came up as the 34th wettest in that 128-year record. And that was 0.56 inches above average. And that's statewide, so not really looking at any specific locations, but it is good to know that this is the first above average summer that we've had in terms of precipitation since 2015. So we've gone through quite a few dry summers, so it's been a nice change. These ranks are out from NOAA NCEI every month, and so this is what on top that June, July, August rank looked like, showing that above average precipitation. And you can see what's interesting there is the pattern is we've got those really wet, much above average states to the south of us with Arizona and New Mexico. But then as you go north, Nebraska was extremely dry for the summer, and you'll see that kind of creep into the northeast corner of our state as well. If we just look at August, that is the map on the lower left-hand side. We were right near average for August. And then the chart on the right shows how each month has ranked since we started the water year. So we're almost finished with the water year. We've had a lot of very near average months, a couple of wetter than average months, and then you'll notice that the ones that really kind of pop out there is April and November as being much below average for the state. So this is how that pattern laid out across the state for that summer time period, June, July, August. So if you see white, that's falling in that near normal range for ranking in that 128-year record. And then as you get into those greens, those were ranked in the top 35 wettest. And then if you get into the browns, you're looking at the bottom 35 driest. So as we look through southern Colorado, particularly into the San Luis Valley and the San Juan Mountains, we see a lot of those wet ranks, especially record wettest ranking down there in, let's see, what are those counties? I'm testing myself, Archuleta and Conejos, maybe. But if we look in the northeast corner, unfortunately, it's a bit of a different story where we've seen extremely dry conditions, like I hinted at, talking about Nebraska. So Logan and Phillips and Sedgwick popping up in that kind of bottom 10th ranked for driest summers on record. This is a little bit different look at what we've been seeing for the summer. This is specifically for August and how many flash flood warnings there were. These were issued by the National Weather Service. So they'll issue these little polygon areas of flash flood warnings. And in August 2022, they actually issued 93 flash flood warnings. And that is their previous high for August was 52. So almost doubled the number of flash flood warnings. I've circled in blue the areas that are those burn scar areas where we have a lot of concern with flash flooding. And so we did get a lot of flash flood activity occurring over those burn scar areas. So a lot of excitement happening in August. For the entire summer, we had, I don't have the total number of warnings here, but it was second in the record. Now the record only goes back to 2008. But just to note that there have been a lot of flash flood warnings this summer, and you're typically going to see that when you're talking about wetter than average conditions throughout the summer. Shifting over to talk about temperature, this is looking at the statewide temperature for that June, July, August period. And that dashed line there shows you what the 1991 to 2020 average is. And we were warmer than the average by almost 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit. So this was the 6th warmest summer in the 128-year record. You can see that consistent bump up especially since the beginning of the 21st century. If we just looked at minimum temperatures, it was actually the 2nd warmest, only behind the summer of 2012. So a lot of that warmth we saw this summer really happened in those minimum overnight low temperatures, just not dropping as much as they normally do. So if you compare it to the average temperature for all of the 20th century, it was actually almost 3 degrees warmer. So a very warm summer indeed. Here are those ranks again. The top shows the summertime ranks. So when you see that 123, that's they rank from coldest to hottest. So it was 123 out of 128. That's where you get your 6th warmest. And that was a much above average summer for pretty much all of the Western United States. A month breakdown looking at just August. August wasn't quite as warm, but still in that above average category. And then a month by month breakdown on the right side there shows that August was at the 14th warmest, July was at the 5th warmest. And if you go back through all the months in this water year, most of them are in that above or much above category. Only February sticks out as being in a below average category. So it's been quite the warm water year as well. This is the pattern for the temperature ranks for that June, July, August time period. Again, June, July, August, 6th warmest, And we've seen in that top 10 ranking of out of 128 years warmth in that just red category throughout much of the state. Not quite as warm or high ranking in southeast Colorado, but still very warm. So this is a look at the 90-degree days that we saw at a variety of stations. This was just updated for me by Peter in our office. And so what we're looking at here is the number of 90-degree days we saw in 2022 in red. And then the purple is that 1991 to 2020 average. So for example, at Denver, you see that we had, and this is for the Denver Central Park station, not the airport station. So at Denver Central Park, there were 61 90-degree days. It's almost 20 over what their average is. And pretty much everywhere you look, you're going to see that the number of 90-degree days was higher than what their average is. Even in Alamosa, that high elevation valley where they typically get 4, they got 9. Always fun to include on here is Dillon, because Dillon is a mountain location that doesn't get 90-degree days, and they didn't this year either. So, but very, very hot summer. So we're going to shift a little and look at what's been happening in September and where we currently stand with conditions across the state. This is the map that I did not get to update. I think I just got a notification for it after I started the presentation. But this is our month to date precipitation for September. And once I get this presentation sent to CWCB, I will have the updated map on here, which will be September 1st through 26th. And you can see the rain that happened in the last week on that one map. So on the upper left is the month to date through the 19th. So last Monday morning, and the greens are where you can see areas that got over 1/4 inch. As you get into that teal color, now we're looking at areas that have gotten 1 inch or more of precipitation. So we see quite a bit of that on the west slope, Mesa, Garfield, Rio Blanco counties, a little bit in the San Juan Mountains, and then a couple of pockets on the eastern plains, particularly around Lincoln and Carson counties. The lower right shows the precipitation that has fallen since that period, just in the last week. And the dots observations there are from co-op stations and CoCoRaHS stations. And then the shading is the radar precipitation estimates for that week. And so anywhere you see blues, dark blue, indicates areas that got 1/2 inch or more of precipitation just in the last week. As it gets into the lighter blue categories, more precipitation has fallen. So if you look in that northeast corner where we've been talking about the dryness, they got over 1.5 inches of precipitation just in the last week. Also of note is in Southwest Colorado, getting close to the Four Corners, and also in the San Juans, a lot of those areas also got over 1 inch of precipitation just in the last week. Here are the temperature anomalies that we've seen basically since the beginning of September to now. And if we saw any blue colors, that would be areas that have experienced below average temperatures. There's a couple of spots, but not really. Most of the state has continued to experience those warmer than average temperatures, with some of the greatest anomalies occurring west of the divide and in the west slope. Although southern Front Range and into Colorado Springs has also seen quite a bit of those warm anomalies as well. So this is looking at standardized precipitation index. So what we're looking at here is we're taking the precipitation that has fallen over a specified time period, in this case, a short time period of 30 days, and then we're standardizing it to see how different from normal is it for that 30-day period. So if you see a gray dot, that means it's kind of near normal, what we would expect to accumulate in that 30-day period. And then when we start to see those warm colors, yellow, oranges, reds, those are anomalously dry, and then the greens, blues, and purples are anomalously wet. So when we look at the last 30 days, we're seeing a lot of areas that have gotten near normal precipitation for the past 30 days, with a couple of dry pockets popping out, especially in those northern mountain areas. This is extending to 6 months, so we're looking at medium to long-term drought. Where is that popping up? And really of note is how much wetness there is on here. We're seeing those anomalously wet categories throughout the northern and central mountains and down into southern Colorado. And then the dry pockets we see really pop up over the northern Front Range and into the northeastern plains. And I wanted to extend out to the 24-month time period just to show how long drought conditions have been occurring in some of our areas. So we're seeing a lot of that long-term drought occurring throughout western Colorado and also into the Front Range and northeast Colorado. So despite our brief periods of wet conditions, the overall pattern over the past 2 years has really tended towards dry. These are our soil moisture conditions as of September 20th. The one important thing to point out is that this product doesn't get updated as quickly, and so it doesn't have the last week's precipitation on there. So we would hope to see some improvement, but we're looking at the top meter of soil. So that is a pretty deep layer, and what we expect to see in deep layers is more slow changes and be able to tell us where those long-term drought conditions are. And so while we do see pockets of normal, we do see a lot of the state still showing that dry conditions in that deep soil moisture layer, particularly in northeast Colorado and into the Four Corners area. Now, evaporative demand, we're going from the surface to the atmosphere. And evaporative demand tells us how much moisture the atmosphere wants to take out of the ground. So it estimates from temperature, solar radiation, wind, and relative humidity, and combining all those conditions, how much moisture is the atmosphere going to try to take out of the ground, whether it's there or not, will provide more or less stress to the vegetation. So where we see white, it doesn't mean that there's no evaporative demand. It just means that the evaporative demand is normal. So we live in an area of the continent where we expect to see a lot of evaporative losses because of that semi-arid climate that we are in. So where it's white, that means it was pretty much normal. Where it's blue means that was less than normal, so there wasn't as high of evaporative demand. And where we see those warm colors is where that evaporative demand was anomalously high. So just looking over the past month, really from the end of August to the end of September, we've seen a little bit of higher evaporative demand in the northeast corner of the state, closer to normal in the other areas of the state. And then if we extend out into that 3-month time period, so really looking at the entire summer, evaporative demand was low for the southwest part of the state and a lot of the west slope. And really the only area where it was high was in the northeast corner. Now the lower evaporative demand that you see, those blue colors in our state on that right map there, is really, we know we had the hot temperatures. So it's really indicative of the humidity that we had. We had much higher dew points through a lot of the summer, and that really helped to limit our evaporative losses that we typically see during the summer. So this is looking at evaporative demand at a couple of our COAGMET sites. COAGMET is our Colorado Agricultural Meteorological Network of stations. This one is for Holyoke, which is really in that perfect location of the worst conditions in our state right now in that northeast corner. And what we're looking at here is how the evaporative demand has accumulated since the beginning of the growing season, April 1st. And so the black line shows how evaporative demand normally accumulates throughout the growing season. All the little gray lines are showing you what the historical record has looked like back to 1992. And then where we are currently is the blue line. And so you can see evaporative demand was a little bit higher than normal for that May-June period. And then it really ramped up and took off and has been kind of competing with that record high year of 1994, and just ticked down just a tiny bit over the past week, but still extremely high. Now, how does that compare to the precipitation that we've seen at Holyoke? Again, the average precipitation accumulation during the growing season is the black line, and the blue line is what we've seen for this growing season. And so basically since mid-June, we've had record low precipitation accumulation at Holyoke. And you can see that decent bump in precipitation in the last week. And while that was an excellent bump in the amount of precipitation, we are still at a record low category. So when you combine the precipitation and the evaporation into what we call the water balance, so looking at the difference of both, the black line is where we expect that difference to land. Looking at the difference between precipitation and evaporation, it's negative and becomes more negative because of the evaporation, which is normal. But what we see in the blue line is that that water balance is even more lopsided than it should normally be. And even with that bump up of precipitation in the last week, just a tiny bit of improvement, not really a recovery. Down in Southeast Colorado, this is looking at Lamar and what their accumulation of evaporative demand has been since the beginning of the growing season. And while they were a little bit above average, they actually had some lower evaporative demand numbers in July and August to help bring that accumulation down to be slightly below average now for this time of year. And I'm just going to switch over to one station in Western Colorado and look at Dove Creek in Southwest Colorado. And we did see a bit of higher evaporative demand there early on in the growing season. But again, you can see how that kind of ticked downward for the summer. So just a tiny bit above average, but not too bad on that. Going to shift and talk about drought conditions. This picture was taken in Arapahoe County back in July, and just an indicator of the drought conditions that were occurring there during the summer, where they were missing a lot of the thunderstorm activity. This is the current U.S. Drought Monitor depiction for the United States. So we can see a lot of areas, particularly in the West, showing those categories of D3 and D4. And, you know, we kind of have a little bit of an oasis here of no drought categories from what's going on east of us and west of us. Well, let's go ahead and zoom in on Colorado. This is last week's map. So this week's map will be released on Thursday. And what we're looking at here is about 48% of the state is in a drought category. That is from D1, which is that peach color, a moderate drought, all the way to D4, which is the maroon color or the exceptional drought. The yellow is not a drought category. It's called the abnormally dry category. And so we have about 30% more of the state in that category. So total, only 15% of the state has nothing or that white. The changes that we've seen since the beginning of summer, this is looking at those categories and how have they changed from June 21st to that most recent map that we were just seeing. Anywhere where you see greens are areas that we have seen overall improvement in drought conditions. So the San Luis Valley, the Sangre de Cristos down into Southeast and Southwest Colorado, we've seen 2 to 3 category improvements since the beginning of summer. Not much has changed in Northwest Colorado. And then if we look in Northeast Colorado, that's where we've seen those 1 to 2 and even 3 category deteriorations in drought conditions. Couple of stats to share with you from those weekly drought maps. Weld County and Logan County have now had 13 consecutive weeks of those D3 categories. Yuma County has had 11 consecutive weeks in D3. In the far northeast corner, Phillips and Sedgwick County have both had 7 weeks in a row of D4. And then down in Southwest Colorado, where you still see that tiny blip of D3, they've had 122 consecutive weeks of that D3. So that they've had D3 or D4 in the county basically since May 19th, 2020. So stay tuned to see if that comes out with the precipitation they've gotten this week. This might be the last week we see D3. All right, we're gonna move on and look at the outlook now. What's coming in our future? Short-term look, here is our 7-day precipitation forecast. So the upper left-hand corner shows the precipitation accumulations that are expected over the next week. And the blues, the dark blues again, show areas that are forecasted to get a ½ inch of more of precipitation. So the northwestern part of the state and into the northern mountains, looking to get some good precipitation activity. The dark green is a ½ inch of more. So that's looking pretty decent for a little bit more precipitation activity for the Front Range and into the Eastern Plains. But the further east you go and the further southeast you go, not as much expected. The lower right-hand corner shows how different is this compared to this week on average. So where you see the greens, this is going to be a wetter than average week. And where you see the browns, it's going to be a drier than average week. Extending out to the 8 to 14 day outlook. So this is looking at October 4th through 10th, what is expected. Temperature on the left shows anywhere where you see those reds are areas that are expected to be above average temperature. The darker the red, the more confident it is. So pretty much everywhere in the state is looking to be more likely than not above average temperatures. On the right is the precipitation for the same time period. We're expecting near normal conditions on the western side of the state and a very slight leaning of drier than average as you go east. So expect some precipitation activity in the mountains. This is not a very active time period for precipitation for Eastern Plains or Front Range. So maybe something, but it probably might not amount to much. Now extending out to the seasonal outlook, this product was released a couple of weeks ago, Thursday, September 15th, and shows the outlook for the October, November, December time period. So again, on the left, we're looking at the likelihood of above average or below average temperatures. Unless you're looking at Alaska, there's no place that shows a likelihood of below average temperatures. And so for Colorado, we're leaning more likely towards above average temperatures for that time period. More confidence as you go to the south and southwest. On the right side is the precipitation outlook for October, November, December. Pretty typical for a La Nina to expect more likely than not for wetter than average in the northwest part of the country. That is not really going to be much help for us as we're looking to lean more towards that drier than average for that time period. And the pattern that you're seeing here, temperature and precipitation, is both pretty consistent with what we would expect during the fall for a La Nina. So speaking of La Nina, here is that forecast. On the left side, what is the likelihood that we would have La Nina conditions versus that would be blue. versus neutral conditions, which would be gray, versus El Nino conditions, which would be red. And so right now, that September, October, November, and into the winter, there's no chance we're going to switch to El Nino. And most likely we are going to stick with those La Nina conditions as we go into the winter and even into that December, January, February time period. Once we start moving towards spring, it's looking more likely that that La Nina is going to weaken and we're going to head more towards those neutral conditions. And that graph on the right shows what all the models are showing in terms of the sea surface temperature anomalies. So when that anomaly is negative, that's an indicator that we are in those La Nina conditions. And as they warm up and get closer to average, the 0 line, that would indicate that we're going towards those neutral conditions. So what does the La Nina mean for fall? I shared this the last time I presented, which was in June, but just another reminder of what is expected, the risk of extremes during a La Nina fall. So this is the September, October, November time period. On the left side shows the risk for warm or cold extremes. So if you had a risk for cold extremes, you would see some blue colors on there, which we don't in Colorado. We actually have a slight risk for warm extremes during the fall. And then if we go over to the right, what is the risk for wet or dry extremes? If we had a risk for wet extremes, you would see the green colors like you see in the northwestern part of the United States. And we don't see a lot for Colorado, but focus in on what you see in southwest portion of the United States and pretty much everywhere surrounding us. We do see that leaning towards increased risk of dry extremes, which I would say does kind of encroach on Colorado. And so we do have that increased risk. This is going to be our third La Nina fall in a row. And what does that mean? Well, does it mean anything to have the third one in a row? We don't know because we don't really have a lot of examples to pull from. This is only the second or third time we've had 3 La Ninas in a row. But let's go back and look at the last 2 La Nina falls to see how those panned out so that I can bring you the Debbie Downer moment. So this is looking at the fall or the October, November, December time period for 2020. The left was our temperature rank and the right is the precipitation rank for that period in 2020. You can see a lot of warm temperature ranks and a lot of dry temperature ranks, particularly dry in Western Colorado and parts of the Eastern Plains, warm pretty much all over. This was the last fall period. So in 2021, that October, November, December time period, temperature very extreme, very warm throughout the entire state. Precipitation, you can see east of the divide, extremely dry conditions for pretty much everywhere east of the divide. West of the divide, you do see those wetter conditions, but that was really just a couple of storm events that occurred in December. And so really overall, the past 2 falls, we have had those predominantly warm and dry conditions. And so that would be what I would expect for this fall. So our key takeaways from this presentation, we did have an active monsoon pattern for the summer. It was beneficial in several aspects. It was good for that soil moisture recharge, even though we do still see some of those dry pockets. It limited that evaporative demand, and we did see some drought improvement from it. We know, though, that those long-term hydrologic drought conditions do remain. Northeast Colorado, a biggest area of concern right now. Even though we did get quite a decent shot of moisture over the area in the past week, it was not enough to erase drought. And another follow-up question maybe to ask once we open up the floor for comments, if anybody knows, did that recent precipitation help with winter wheat planting at all? La Nina conditions are going to continue into the fall and into the winter. If the fall is warm and dry, like I think is more likely than not, that is likely going to worsen our drought conditions, and we will unfortunately start another snowpack season at a little bit of a deficit. That is all I have for you today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Becky. Someone noted in the chat that my audio was a little muffled. Are you hearing me all right?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. Well, are there any questions for Becky? Just going through the chat. Well, thanks so much. Really appreciate your update, Becky. And I guess if there's no questions for you, we'll turn it over to Brian.
Excellent, thank you. Here, let me turn on my camera real quick. Actually, I'll get the presentation going first. All right, I got a new computer here, so I'm not exactly sure how it's gonna line up my screens here. All right. And then let's see, are you guys seeing the presentation screen or the presenter screen?
I'm not seeing anything quite yet here.
Ah.
I'll make sure.
There's a third screen, and it's probably, oh, well, if you said it wasn't showing anything, I'll try again and maybe give it a second. Maybe I need to take control. Let's see. There we go. Let's try. Okay, let's see what it does with this one. Sorry for the delay.
No worries, it's coming up now, but we're seeing the presenter view.
Oh, okay, thanks. Let me see if I can change screen. Is it just showing my screen now?
Yeah, it's just showing, it's not in presentation mode though right now.
Right. See if I can get out of it. I don't know why this is always a bugger. Well, there's the more recent Prism map. All right, let's try.
There we go. That looks good to me.
Is it actually on the presenter or the presentation?
Yep, you're good. It's in the presentation mode now.
Oh, wow, interesting. Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. Again, sorry for the delay. It's been a while since I've presented, and I know last time I changed up the format a little bit. I think Carl may have been going with the traditional format, but especially since it's towards the end of the water year and snowpack's really not a factor so much anymore. We don't have any stream flow forecast. I've decided to take a slightly different approach. I do want to just go over snowpack real quick, basically what the history was. And that's very simply that snowpack was near the new 1991 to 2020 normal. But when you compare it to some of the older normals, you know, the normals going back to 1971, snowpack peak was a little bit below normal. And that's why our runoff, that's one of the reasons why our runoff was not quite as good this year in 2022. There's a number of other compounding factors that are, well, timing here. The snowpack in the southeast or in the southern part of Colorado melted out a good bit earlier than normal. And then in the northern half of the state, while snowpack was a little bit below normal peak, it held on a little bit longer. But we've got the dry soil moistures that Becky pointed out. They've honestly been, I would say, plaguing us for the last 2 to 3 years, and the falls have been no exception. Again, as Becky pointed out, when you have dry soil moistures and low stream base flows going into a winter, that leaves those soils pretty thirsty. And when you do get the snow melt, whether it's above normal or below normal snowpack, that melt is actually absorbed. A significant portion of it is absorbed by the soils, and they've been drier than the normal recently. So that's one of the bigger factors leading into why these near normal or slightly below normal snowpacks have really resulted in below to well below normal runoff, in addition to a few other things, including reservoirs. But where are we at right now for reservoirs? Statewide reservoirs are at 78% of normal, and this was as of the end of August. We have a few more days here in September that I don't think are going to change things too much. Fortunately, things have been a bit better here towards this month, as compared to the rest of the year. We've seen some pretty good monsoonal precipitation, and that's resulted in some increased stream flows. We'll get into that here in a little bit, but at this point, it's not really going to affect the reservoirs that much since we're so close to the end of the year. And I'll again get into how much impact the precipitation that we've seen has had in our mountainous areas. Excuse me one sec. So you can see from the last map that there's just a few spots, few larger basins in the state where reservoirs are near normal. Most of the rest are below to well below normal. And the next 3 graphs, much like this, I've broken up so that they can be scaled a little bit better. So you get an idea. This is the long-term basin-wide totals for each of the basins. So as you can see here in this, the kind of slightly brighter green line is the combined Yampa White and Little Snake reservoirs. And you can see those reservoirs are very close to normal. And the upper Rio Grande is actually at 103% of normal. We probably saw that from the last graph. And then moving into some of the larger, or the basins with larger reservoir totals, the Gunnison is lagging behind, is still pretty low, and has been over the last few years. The Arkansas, however, is doing better and has been doing better. It's been getting just better precip over the last few years for a number of different reasons. And then in the South Platte, again, another front range, east-facing mountain ranges, they've been doing a bit better in some of the parameters that we monitor over the last few years. So its reservoirs are doing relatively well, slightly above average there. And then looking at the statewide totals for all the reservoirs combined as a state, and then the Colorado headwaters and the San Miguel, Dolores, Animas, San Juan combined reservoirs, you can see that the statewide and the Southwest basins are running below normal, as you saw from the map. And then fortunately, the Colorado headwaters is running pretty close to normal at this point. But compared to the long term, we're not as bad on a number of these reservoirs as we have been in the past. Well, statewide, we're not doing as bad as we were in 2002, so that's great. But looking at the reservoirs in the San Miguel, Dolores, Animas, San Juan basin, they have been doing near about record poor, compared to 2002, 2012, and the latter part of the teens decade. Okay, looking at precipitation, here's where things get a little bit more positive. What I thought I would do is roll back the clock a little bit and look at where we were at last time I presented, which is actually about the time where the monsoonal or the precipitation faucet, I shouldn't say monsoonal, just kind of precipitation kind of changed in about May last time I presented. And we can see here that as of, actually, I think I can hover my mouse over, sorry, this screen, and you should be able to see it. Precipitation statewide as of May, the middle of May, was below normal. There were really only a few basins in the northern part of the state where precipitation for the water year was near to slightly below normal. So in the South Platte, North Platte, Colorado, and Gunnison, things were okay. But as you got further south in the state, which has been typical for these La Nina years, you were looking at, or we typically look at below normal precipitation, and this year up until May was really kind of no exception. Especially and snowpack was for the most part following that same trend. Now let's fast forward to yesterday. This is the data from yesterday, and you can see that things have improved significantly at our mountain locations. Particularly, the improvements have really been realized in the southern portion of the state, but largely it can be said that the whole state for water year-to-date precipitation is near normal in our mountain locations. So that's a real good turnaround since those 70 and 80% of normals we were seeing in the southern half of the state. Now, the northern half of the state hasn't realized quite the same amount of precip that the southern half has, but for us, for the entire state to be at about 100% of normal precipitation right now, after the last few years that we've had, especially going through the middle part of summer, we're definitely going to take where we're at right now. So I've moved on to the next graph, which shows precipitation through yesterday for just September. We call that month to date. You can see here again that the southern half of the state has bode pretty well for precipitation through September. The northern half of the state, not quite so well. The South Platte hasn't been as it hasn't benefited quite as well as some of those southern and western basins. But I think it's really, it feels really good to highlight exactly the high levels of precipitation that the southern half of the state has seen. So I love featuring that. And to kind of point out what I was mentioning earlier, where since I last presented in about the middle of September here, this goes to the end of May really through now. This is the total accumulated precip as a percent of normal for the last 120 days since May 29th through yesterday. And here again, we see that the southern half of the state has really seen the benefits of that monsoonal moisture. And I'm going to take a slightly deeper dive here a little later in the presentation, but we'll also take a bit of a deeper dive and look at it basin by basin here with the trend graphs. Northern part of the state hasn't seen the same amount of precip as the southern half of the state in terms of percent of normal, but still good improvements that have brought us up to that 100% of normal level pretty much statewide. 101 to be exact, as you can see from this graph. So this is the statewide precipitation graph that shows over the course of the year, and that's displayed by this black line. I also decided to include the 2021, 20, 19, and 18 water years for precipitation. You can see that fortunately this year we are better than 2020 at this point. 2021 and 2018 were not quite as good as 2019 at this point, and I hope that we don't get to that point. That would be a lot of precip in a very small time frame, and we don't really want to see that jump. But the fact that we are close to this green line, which is the median line, is really good news. That's the 1991 to 2020 median line. I thought I'd jump around some of the more extreme basins in the state, just to kind of highlight how things have progressed. But like I was pointing out in the previous maps, precipitation is very close to normal across most of our basins. Here in the Yampa White, Little Snake combined basins, this graph showing us being at 99% of normal for the water year as of yesterday. And you can see that over the last few months, 2 months, 2.5 months, we've really tracked quite close to normal when you compare specifically to 3 of the past 4 years where things have been much more dry. In the southwest corner of the state, the combined San Miguel de Lower San Juan basins, here again, precipitation is 99% of normal. It feels really good to say that after the last few years that we've had, especially when you compare to 2018, which was record low. doing a good bit better. And then kind of on the other side of the extreme, which is not really all that extreme, at 108% of normal, the Arkansas River Basin has the highest precip in the state. And it's actually pretty close to 2019 here, this high green line. But as I mentioned, the Arkansas River Basin has been doing better than a lot of the other basins in the state for precipitation as a percent of normal. And then finally, in the Rio Grande headwaters, here again, precipitation throughout the water year is 101% of normal at this point. And I did a little bit of maintenance in the basin last week, and that's why you see this kind of not true drop. We haven't gotten around to QCing that data yet. So you can just project this line flat a little ways. Actually, I wouldn't be surprised if it went up. I was at Trinchera, our Trinchera Snowtell site on the east side of the Southern Sangres last week, and I got absolutely rained on. I think it rained about an inch while we were there. We were there for 2 hours. It was pretty awesome. I really enjoy the rain after having not had a whole lot of rain recently. So it was great to see. Okay, soil moisture. For the last presentation, I think soil moisture is a sensor that we're growing more confident in at least the monitoring side here within the NRCS. Some of the sensors, actually all of the sensors need significant QA, QC, but that doesn't mean there can't be some information gleaned from it. And here I'm using the 8-inch sensor. So it's really not one of the deeper sensors. It's not one of the longer term depths of soil or longer term tanks, maybe, as the Weather Service has referred to it to me. The 8-inch soil moisture sensor is kind of an in-between sensor. It's pretty close to the surface, but it kind of gives some indications of what's going on deeper down. And fortunately, this is one of the sensors that we have at most of our sites, or excuse me, it's one of the most prevalent soil moisture sensors. Some of the other sensors are not quite as prevalent, such as the 40-inch sensor or the 20. But this 8-inch sensor, I'm becoming more confident in. And you can see that there's some anomalies in here, the reds, and some of the blues might be anomalous. We really just haven't gotten to QC that quite yet. We don't have the resources to do that, but I think the general idea is here in that 8-inch sensor. As I went through the data, seemed to be true enough, I think, that we can display it. So kind of like what Becky was showing in her presentation, that there's areas where soil moisture is near normal, and then there's areas where soil moisture is at a deficit. And that's why I don't think some of those red and orange warm dots are necessarily anomalous or erroneous, I should say. Maybe they're a little bit more anomalous, but we definitely have that. And I think we're definitely seeing the impacts of the precipitation that we've seen with this monsoonal moisture and the rain that we've received over the course of this summer. So in the mountains, soil moisture is actually looking a lot better than it has in the past. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually let me take a half step back. Unfortunately, I'll highlight the Yampa and White combined basins where soil moisture isn't doing quite so well compared to normal. You can see that soil moisture by the black line here is tracing below what it has been over the last 3 years and below normal, as I mentioned while I was talking about the graph there. So there's some improvements to be made there in the northwest corner of the state. However, the other basins in the state are actually showing a fair amount of promise, which is great. So what I've done with the last graph and the next few graphs that show soil moisture across these larger basins in the state. Of course, we're displaying this year in the black line, and then the last few years, 2021, 20 and 19 in some of these colors here down below, just to get an idea. Again, as Becky mentioned, and as I'll kind of reiterate here, The fall is a very important time frame for building that kind of groundwork, those base soil moistures and base stream flows before we build that snowpack. And if we have a dry situation setting up before that snowpack sets in, then we have those dry soils that the melting snowpack is just going to recharge, and we're going to lose some of that to recharging those soils. So as you can see, in the previous 3 years, we were near about record low in some cases, or I can't quite see this. I think we were record low there for a time. In one of those years, I can't quite tell because I think the colors are blending together. But this year, fortunately, in the upper Rio Grande, soil moisture is better at this point. It's better than normal and better than it was in the last 3 years. So excellent news, in my opinion. There is time for this to still tail off. You can see where we started last year and just 5 days at that point last year. So on October 1 of 2022, we were at record low, and we got a little bit of bump. I don't think that was from precipitation. It might have been from the soils beginning to freeze. But we may have had a little bit of precipitation there. But where we're at right now, we could see a little bit of a decline, but hopefully it will maintain and continue to be propped up by a few more storms, and then we'll have good soil moisture leading into this year, and a great base for next year. Looking at the Arkansas River Basin, the 8-inch sensor was showing record low at the beginning of last year, and now at this point we're showing record high soil moistures in the Arkansas River Basin. It probably will come down a little bit, I mean, unless we get another storm, but here again, this is great leading into next year. Now, this is the Arkansas River Basin where I decided to show the two extremes. But across the entire state of Colorado, we are showing above normal soil moisture. It looks like it's actually getting above the 70 percentile as well. For where we're at right now, so much better than where we were last year, and that's across much of the state. So that's really good news. Some caveats: soil moisture data is still very new. We only have, in some cases, back to 2008. Most sensors really kind of started in 2012, 2014 timeframe, and we haven't done too much quality control, but we're starting to become more confident in the data. And we're seeing some of the best soil moisture levels we've seen since 2014. Most of these improvements have probably been due to the monsoon, but definitely due to the precipitation that we've seen over the course of the summer. And again, I can't stop driving this home because it feels good. Soil moisture conditions where they're at right now across most of the state are great compared to the last 3 years, and near normal, which is great, again, compared to those last 3 years. Okay, stream flows. Just real quick, this is the USGS map that shows stream flows as of yesterday. In general, I looked for a map to see if I could find a comparison to last year at this time. I could not find that. It looks like that map interface is new, or at least to me, within the last year. So I need to familiarize myself with it, but I always think this is a really good way to display stream flows as they are right now. And as I recall, this is more greens that I've seen in a while for this time of year. Another way to show that is from our interactive map or show stream flows. Instead of showing what the instantaneous value is as it did in that last graph, what I'm showing here is the total volumetric stream flow that flowed through by the dots, each of the gauges for the month of August, for the entire month of August. And we're seeing here again, great stream flows in the Rio Grande, the Arkansas, and in the combined San Miguel de Lourdes, Santa Fe, San Juan. Excuse me. So here again, this is excellent information and an excellent status report compared to last year. Given the fact that we did not have a great snowpack this year and we had such dry conditions last year, the fact that we have these great stream flows right now should really, or hopefully will bump up those base flows. Now, of course, this is the lower time of year where stream flows are running lower. So somebody could make the argument that, well, 170% of normal is not a whole lot if you're talking about 50 or 100 CFS. but hopefully it is charging those soil moisture conditions, those base flows, and it is indicative of better conditions throughout. Unfortunately, in the northern half of the state, things aren't quite so great. I mean, still good that, the South Platte, Colorado, and Gunnison are slightly below normal, but the northern half of the state could use some additional precipitation. But in general, I would still say that this outlook, or not outlook, but the set of conditions that we're seeing right now are showing promise. However, trying to focus on the positive here. While the month to date stream flows are looking good, or excuse me, the August stream flows are looking good. Looking at it in perspective of the entire water year, the stream flows from October 1st through August 31st, stream flows still aren't doing all that great. We're still looking at below normal conditions, of course, with the exception of the South Platte. Conditions are still below normal across much of the state. So here again, the monsoonal moisture and the summer rains that we've got have not made a massive impact, but we'll take what we can get. It's made an improvement on those August stream flows. So typically at this point, I'll go through the stream flow forecast, but instead I wanted to kind of show some of the impacts of that monsoonal moisture and the precip that we saw over the summer, and some interesting trends that an interesting trend that I kind of noticed. So this is showing stream flow this is showing precipitation over the course of June, and you can see in the southern part of the state, precipitation wound up being great. 400% of normal, 200% of normal in the southern half of the state, and near normal in the northern half of the state. So what did that wind up meaning for stream flow for the month of June? Well, I didn't put up the May map, so we can't see what that change is, but in general, depending on when that precipitation fell through the course of June, if it fell towards the end, which I think I remember from the graphs that it kind of did, it really didn't have much of an impact. So this is kind of a bit of the base map to get an idea. And then we'll see what impacts here it had into July. Now this is the precipitation map for all of July. Again, we had better precipitation in the north than we did in June, and still great precipitation, better than normal, almost 200% in the Rio Grande and near about 150% in the whole southern portion of the state. So again, July wound up being an excellent precipitation month. And what did that do to stream flows? Well, if you can kind of remember what those numbers were from two maps ago, it made some significant impacts. I mean, the San Miguel, Dolores, San Juan was in the 30s in June. The Rio Grande was in the 20s in June, and we've seen a significant increase, but it's still below normal, right? So some of those really high precipitation totals are making an improvement, but they're not above normal. Well, what happened in August? The northern part of the state got better precip than it had seen in the last 2 months. And here again, the southern half of the state got spectacular precip, normal to well above normal precipitation through August. And then looking at the stream flow totals for, again, the month of August, which we already kind of looked at, you see the improvement. Stream flows have finally come up to kind of match where those precipitation levels have been. Now, again, stream flows are typically low this time of year, so it might not take as much as it typically would, say, during the winter or the higher precip months of the year, but this is still an excellent improvement, particularly for the southern half of the state, which has had a bunch of years, or a number of years, below normal now. Northern half of the state still needs some added boosts, but if we learned anything from those previous months, it might take a little bit of time for those soil moistures to kick up and hopefully realize that in the stream flows. However, I think it is going to take, we've had some pretty dry months in that northwest corner of the state and some of the northern portions of the state. So we would like to see some additional precip here in October and November before that snow really sets in. But as Becky said, the outlook isn't looking all that great, unfortunately. And then finally, I just thought I'd round out with where the water year to date stream flow is. Still not looking great, but it's the end of the year. There's probably no way we could or really should try and bump these stream flows up for the end of the year. We got a new water year in front of us. And I think we should look to that and cross our fingers for that year. So, all right, in summary, reservoirs are still below normal for much of the state, near normal in the Colorado, South Platte, Yampa White, and Rio Grande, but arguably, you know, still below normal, and that's indicated by the 78% of normal. I'm sorry,
Okay,
does somebody have a question? No. So the precipitation over the last 120 days has been great. Right where we need it in the southern half of the state, near about 150% of normal, give or take. In the northern half of the state, near to slightly above normal. And would love to see this continued precip coming forward, but it doesn't look very optimistic. Honestly, I think the precipitation that we've seen over the last month, 2.5 months, has been great to see a nice, steady, above normal precipitation. It's arguably better than kind of what we saw in 2013, where we had those extremely large precip events in a short period of time that can cause flooding. Even though Becky pointed out that we have had a lot of flood watches, and it has been a lot of monsoonal moisture in general, as it shows up on this graph. It is, you know, relatively consistent. I'm not sure how many floods we've actually had, but you know, the way that we've seen it in the mountains, it's been very beneficial, as I've pointed out. Statewide year-to-date precip, statewide year-to-date precip is near normal. So in summation, soil moisture is looking great. And hopefully it can hold on and continue to be propped up by just a few more storms before we really have the onset of the permanent or seasonal snowpack here, usually at the end of October, middle of November, depending on where you're at in the state. Soil moisture looking pretty good, particularly in the Arkansas, but generally, you know, compared to the last few years, looking really good, with the exception of the Yampa White basins. And then stream flow, unfortunately, running below normal for the water year to date. But at this point, it is bumped up in that southern portion of the state for the instantaneous observations. So that's hopefully going to persist into this fall and give us some better base flows. So I think I pretty much covered most of this stuff. Trying to see if there's anything that I really need to go over. I don't think there is. I think I covered it in those last slides. So that's really all that I have. I'm happy to take any questions if you have any. So thank you for your time.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Brian. Appreciate you coming and presenting to us today. Does anyone have questions for Brian? Just check in the chat to see. Yeah, thanks for all the info. Becky mentioned that in the chat.
Ryan, this
I'm
is
not-
Robert Staccato. Brian, on the Gunnison Basin, you said storage levels were pretty low. How much of it is attributable to the emergency releases that were made from Blue Mesa, do you think? In 2021?
In 2021, I'll be honest, I don't really know. A lot of that reservoir stuff, it's best to ask the water managers, you know, in that case, it's the BOR, right? Or I'm not sure if it's in the Corps' hands. I guess somebody might have a better idea than I would. My simple guess is that it has had impacts, and I would probably say semi-significant impacts. Let me see if I can go back. Is this the reservoir? No. There we go. Let's see. So Blue Mesa is, can you see my cursor?
No.
Okay. Maybe you can see it here. So this is Blue Mesa, right?
I see it, yeah.
And it's pretty far below. I think those there is significant impacts from that, but I'm not 100% sure.
Thanks, Brian.
Yep.
Awesome. Any additional questions? I'm not seeing any. Well, thank you so much, Brian. Really appreciate the info and great presentation.
Thanks, of course.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. If there's no other questions, I think we'll go over to the next portion of the program today and turn it over to Kat.
Thanks, Sam. I'm just gonna share my screen here. You guys seeing that?
Yep, seeing it, but not. Oh, there we go. Perfect.
All right, thank you. All right, for everybody who I have not previously met, I am Kat Weissmiller. I've facilitated a few of these meetings in the past. I'm the CWCB Deputy Section Chief for Water Supply Planning. And as you may or may not know, in June of this year, we passed in Colorado House Bill 22-1151, which was basically calling for a turf replacement program at the state level. There has been a lot of speculation and conversation about what that was going to look like. And so we at CWCB have been kind of giving a lot of thought to it and wanted to both share our ideas and also hear your thoughts and questions about our ideas right now so that we can continue to shape the program going forward. So today I'm going to walk you through some of the basic concepts. Our section chief, Russ Sands, shared this last week at our board meeting. It's really similar to what he mentioned, but I will walk you through it and happy to answer any questions. And Russ and Sam have both been really involved with this effort and will also be on the line today for questions as well. So to start off with, this legislation defines non-essential turf, and non-essential turf is essentially, non-essential turf is located in areas that receive little, if any, use. Medians, areas adjacent to open space or transportation corridors, areas sloped with more than a 25% grade, commercial properties and common areas, and then lastly, portions of residential yards. And I want to point that out because a lot of the media focus around this has been residential yards, but it is just a portion of what's covered in the legislation. The legislation also talks about a couple key things, and this is really simplified, but it calls for help with funding existing turf replacement programs that are already housed within utilities or other entities. And then it supports the development of new turf replacement programs. And then it also provides staff to CWCB to do both. This legislation is really, we're thinking about it as kind of catalyzing the next step in a much larger conversation. Historically, water plan grants can and have funded turf replacement in Colorado since the program was established in 2017. Now this legislation is allowing us to kind of explore some different funding options and different mechanisms. It also talks and speaks to a larger conversation that is happening both as part of the water plan update, which as you may or may not know, the Colorado Water Plan is out for public comment right now. That comment period will close at the end of this week, but the water plan calls for transformational landscape change, and it really builds on a much larger movement that goes back decades, and Russ and I have talked at length about it, but Denver Water, for example, coined the term xeriscape in 1981. So this conversation about landscape change has been going on for decades, and this is kind of building on a lot of conversations in this space. So what we're really thinking about is how do we build the landscapes that we know we need, facing down climate change and just changing weather patterns. How do we build the landscapes of tomorrow today? Some important considerations are that water savings from turf replacement in Colorado will not be the same as they are elsewhere. Colorado isn't Nevada. We have different ET rates. We have different seasonal irrigation patterns. So those are some considerations there. We also acknowledge that the conversation really needs to be more than just about turf replacement. It needs to be about irrigation, what kinds of vegetation might be used to replace turf, and tree health is a really important component of that conversation as well. We know, and we have seen that cities and utilities, my battery is running low, have the local tools, teams, and tactics to to implement turf replacement programs. And so we really want to focus in that space. And then lastly, we know that those challenges exist both on the east and the west slope. Sorry, my screen's just all shifted on me because I plugged in. All right, can you still see my screen?
Yep, still
Good.
seeing it.
Okay, great. So as far as advancing this conversation, I want to note that, hang on one second. We've been thinking at CWCB about ways to really advance the conversation. The first of which is we will be hosting a Colorado Landscape Summit, and that will be on November 9th, 2022 at the Denver Botanic Gardens at Chatfield Farms. And we're going to really be, we're hoping to bring water professionals together to discuss turf replacement savings, really holistic approaches to landscape transformation, the challenges on both the east and the west slope, what kinds of replacement vegetation are ideal, what are climate appropriate landscapes going forward, and then workshopping a lot of ideas around this. And then as for the turf replacement program itself, I want to give you a little bit of context for what we are thinking about at CWCB. As I mentioned, the water savings may be lower than expected, lower than maybe has been reported in some places. So we really want to measure what that looks like to understand if we're successful or not. We also want to minimize the overhead of this program in terms of staffing and potential contractors, and really maximize the use of the funding that we have for turf replacement. We have until July 1st of 2023 to implement the program, but we're really hoping to stand up something sooner, ideally like March timeframe next year. And that's in part to maximize the 2023 and 2024 irrigation seasons, recognizing that this has a pretty strong seasonal component. And we really need to be flexible in how cities and utilities or other qualifying entities, there are a range of them, will spend money and how they want to implement their programs. So what we're envisioning is that the funding that we have is $2 million that were allocated for staff and program costs. But when you consider the staffing required for the program, which there's a couple different staffing positions, it really leaves about $1.5 million for the program over 2 cycles of $750,000 each. In cycle 1, we would put $550,000 towards existing programs. At the moment, we know about 22 programs across the state that are doing turf replacement. And that would also put about $200,000 for new programs. And when you break that down across 22 known programs, that's a pretty small chunk of change. It's $25,000 a piece, but we do think it's an important catalyst to get those programs up and funded and rolling. And then that would also transfer it to cycle 2 the following year for new or known programs, and another $200,000 for new programs, startups, including consultation and educational materials for those programs. So we know we need some good data to determine the impact of this program and then to figure out the next steps from here. So we're planning to collect pre and post data on water savings where possible with this program. And again, our next steps are the Landscape Summit I mentioned, which is on November 9th, and you can find that information. We have a QR code, and I'm going to put a link in our chat in just a moment. We're going to continue developing the program, and we really want to hear from you today and in other forums to understand how best we can work with utilities and other qualifying entities for this program. And we'll continue talking with our potential partners. And we're hoping to roll out the program, as I said, in spring of 2023, ideally March, but this is an aspirational goal. We'll see if we can get it done. We have been in conversations with Resource Central. We've been thinking about ways to include equity into this program and try to really consider programs for places that don't already have existing programs and how to fund and develop those programs. And with that, I think I will open it up for questions. kind of short and sweet, but I hope that we can chat through some of those other ideas that you guys may have or questions.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Kat. So it looks like we had one question in the chat. I tried to answer it a little bit, but didn't know if anyone wanted to jump in there. It was saying that Karen asked if Telluride has been getting a lot of pressure to accept artificial turf as a turf replacement. As all probably know, this is not an ideal option. Is there any guidance thought on the state level? So I just kind of reiterated in the chat that under House Bill 221151, that artificial turf will not be accepted as a viable replacement program. But didn't know if anyone else wanted to add to that or had any kind of similar questions.
Sam, this is Russ. I'm just off camera, but we'll just jump in to say it's a great question. We've heard that comment a few times, and I think other considerations you just want to think about with artificial turf is, well, both what it's made up of, but also the heat that it can provide. Sometimes artificial turf can get extremely hot. We see like Northern Water did a study where they did a flyover of just their area, and the artificial turf that they installed was warmer than anything around it, including the asphalt and concrete. So it definitely has a lot of other impacts you might want to think about, including those on soil health, that I think broaden the conversation around it just being the go-to alternative.
Are there research documents available through CWCB or the state that could help support that? We've found a few documents, but it would be helpful to have a bit more.
I don't know that we have a great question, Karen. I don't know that we have a standing like go-to sources that we could point you to, but I'm sure we could dig up some things. My first stop, because Northern is excellent about the work they do. They haven't always maybe publicized that, but I would reach out to Frank Kinder and see if they have that analysis. It was a few years back, but it's pretty interesting. They just did that aerial heat survey and see if you could get that. But we can give you his name for sure. And I found other sources just by searching online, but California's done a lot of work in that space too.
Thank you.
If there aren't any other questions, I just wanted to note that we wanted to get out in front of potentially some of the budget cycles you all might be working on, so that we could let you all know, so you can plan ahead. We'd love to hear how this fits into your planning cycle, and any thoughts you have about where our rollout plan, the timing of it fits in, would all be great for us to hear, and just make sure that we're doing our best to accommodate the needs of providers and utilities. I see a question in the chat from Greg. Looking forward to the new program. I think there are going to be multiple benefits beyond water savings, like lowering temperatures, storm management, etc. Are you planning to measure some of those things too? I think the answer is we'd like to measure as much as we can, and we're still trying to figure out exactly what that's going to look like. We do have, for those of you who have worked with us on grant applications, we have a new portal that we're using, and we will be using for this turf program that we're hoping to use to kind of start that initial data collection process. And so we will probably, we're still kind of tweaking what that will look like, but those are all really good considerations. Thanks, Greg.
Yeah, and I would certainly say that things like that would be great things to kind of bring up at the landscape summit and stuff like that. I know that we're looking for suggestions on things that might be some good things to measure and monitor. So really appreciate that question, Greg. All right. Do we have any additional questions for Kat? I know Kat was asking about folks' schedules and if there was any timing considerations. Does anyone want to speak to that? Looks like Brian, see your hand up. Do you want to go for it?
Yeah, I just have a quick question, and I didn't even know that this had come to fruition. Since June, I've been out in the field and working on a number of other things, but I know that the community that I live in, the HOA would be relatively against moving to anything other than watered grass. What authorities or abilities to override HOAs would exist? I'm not sure if this is in the realm, if this question is necessarily well directed here, but I just wonder what ability we'd have to get around HOAs, at least my particular one.
I don't want to speak for Russ because I think he may know this off the top of his head, but I know there is legislation that prevents HOAs from there are some legislative bounds on what HOAs can mandate in terms of turf. So I think that I'd need to look it up and confirm with you what it is. But I know that there are you do have some legal backstop to hopefully work with if you wanted to, pursue some turf replacement with an HOA.
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely want to get away from watering my grass if I could, but I know that our HOA is kind of against it. So yeah, if there's more information to come in the future, or if you do find any of that information, I'd be more than happy to take it.
Yeah, we can pass that along. Thanks, Scott. I was trying to quickly look it up, and I do not actually know the House bill on the top of my head. It's actually some years old at this point, and I'm not sure how much teeth it has in it, but it does set some parameters around I think the percent of landscaping that can be turf, or at least allowing options for things that are low water. So that arguably would be helpful. There was also a question in the chat, I think, that someone asked about, will the state be putting out a list of suggested plants? Likely we will not, because we don't have, as of at least CWCB, a list that we point to, but I would probably say we'll point to established lists that are out there, including things like Plant Select and the work that CSU Extension's done. Part of the issue that's ongoing with this is thinking about the breadth of issues. It's one challenge to take out turf. It's another challenge to say, well, what does it get replaced with? And in most cases, we're not talking about it getting replaced with nothing. We're talking about it getting replaced with hopefully a lower water using material, but in some cases, it may be things that still require water. Karen, you're also reminding me, you might find this interesting, but in City of Boulder, when we replaced some landscape with artificial turf for a soccer field, we ended up having to water the artificial turf just to keep it cool. So it's not always a no water alternative. And establishing a Colorado standard is part of what we're thinking about in the current water plan draft, which is out for public comment through the end of this week. But when we think about transformative landscape change, certainly a big part of it is, what do we put in, and what's the right plant material for Colorado? What's the right mix of both vegetative landscapes, including trees, but also softscapes and hardscapes? And what do we really need in terms of gallons per square foot to build those landscapes of the future?
Yeah, thank you for answering that. Sorry to digress from the initial question, but that's helpful. Thank you.
And Brian, I think I just found that legislation that limits HOAs it prevents HOAs from limiting xeriscape, I think is the actual way that the angle that it takes. So I just threw that in the chat.
Much appreciated.
Perfect. Well, any additional questions for Kat, Russ, and I before we turn it over to kind of task force discussion and water provider report outs?
Thanks, everyone.
All right, last call. Well, I guess we'll move into the final portion of this meeting. So just wanted to open it up for any discussion from task force members. It looks like Robert Sakata, did you have a comment or discussion item?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Back to Kat again, and Russ and you guys. Are you inviting the landscape professionals to be a part of the discussion, you know, their association or those designing and constructing landscapes?
Great question, Director Sakata. For those that don't know, Robert Sakata is also director on our CWCB board and always engaged. So the answer is we've thought this up as primarily to start the conversation. It's not the landscape summit is really meant to be a tee off. So absolutely, I don't know that we always immediately at our fingertips have the right mix of people. I don't know, honestly, traditionally, if in Colorado across many water conservations, we're always getting to the right groups. But of course, we work with groups like GreenCo and Colorado WaterWise that have been traditionally working in that space. I will say, though, that one of the conversations that I really would like to move to, because a lot of this is very immediately moves to the funding and how do you fund something. And our analysis just internally has shown some pretty large dollar amounts that get up into the billions. When we're talking about that amount of money, well, of course you could use taxpayer dollars. Of course you could do something like bonding at a city, but those are arguably, bigger, maybe more extreme options that are maybe not even always as equitable as just adjusting rates and thinking about water budgets and tiered structures that actually put the onus on the people that are wasting the most water and potentially free up dollars for the low end. So what I'm kind of initially excited about is having a conversation that focuses on that municipal space. Because at least in my experience for City of Boulder, landscape education and training certainly has to be a piece of this. It can't be understated. However, if your water budget only says you can water this much, what we've seen is generally landscapers will work to that standard. Sometimes they want to know, tell me the number that I need to hit, and I'll hit that. In other cases, they're getting told by the homeowner, I don't care what the number is, make it green, and that's it. And so that's just kind of a larger battle that we need to have and think about as we're bringing in that community. But absolutely, we are open to having them there, and we'll work to invite them.
Thanks, Russ. That makes a lot of sense. I know in the agricultural side, when we work to really protect our watersheds from, runoff from fertilizer, educating farmers about the cost savings of, they're paying for that fertilizer. And I think I might have shared with you at the board meeting that the landscaping changes that we made at our house, and we live in town, I estimated I'm going to pay back on savings from water over 8 years. So I think, part of that educational effort is not necessarily to provide the water to change landscaping, but the education show what the payback is going to be from those changes.
Absolutely. And I think that was a great point. The other thing that you had mentioned at the board meeting, I think, was just the amount of cooling that a little bit of, vegetation you had did add to your home. And I think that's important point when, questions like Karen's, when they're thinking about adding material that potentially adds heat, that potentially has other cost impacts to cooling and other needs that you might have. So a lot of this is about mitigating unintended consequences and trying to think holistically of what is the change that we really want to see that supports all people, the types of cities we want, agriculture, doesn't end up increasing water use. So there's a lot of things we need to think about.
Thank you.
Perfect. Well, thanks for the question. I just wanted to open it up, see if there's any discussion items, or turn it up to see if Desi was on to add anything to mention about Muni task force. Sorry to put you on the spot if you didn't have anything ready.
I don't have anything. We haven't met since the last time we had this meeting, so there aren't any updates from the municipal task force.
Okay,
Yeah,
perfect.
I will just, Sam, I'll just add, Desi and I have chatted, and we are going to be holding a Muni task force meeting. I believe it's next week, the 5th. So we'll be sharing some of this turf replacement program information at that meeting as well, and talking about a few other things. So
Okay,
just flag that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That's great to know. Put that in my calendar. Awesome. Well, any other discussion items or water provider report outs? I think I saw quite a few of you online. So Castle Rock, Aurora, Colorado Springs, Denver Water. Anybody want to jump in and give an update?
I can jump in. This is Jordan Soldano from Denver Water. No major updates from us. Our reservoirs are currently 87% full, and normal for this time of year is about 88% full. September water use so far has been within a few percent of what we expected, and really we just continue to see our customers responding to weather changes and precipitation.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much, Jordan. Appreciate you jumping in and giving us a report out. All right. Any other report outs from water providers? Cool.
This
Checking
is
the chat.
Isabel.
Perfect. Thank you, Isabel.
Isabel from the city of Boulder. Our reservoirs are, I think, tracking around average. And just like Jordan mentioned, our water use is very, very dependent on the weather, whether it's raining or whether it's really hot. We did get a lot of those summer storms in the last couple months of summer, but now things have dried out a little bit more. So kind of going into the usual fall irrigation before the winter comes. But yeah, things are running pretty close to normal, I'd say.
Excellent. Good to hear.
Thanks.
Well, thank you so much, Isabel, for your report out. Excellent. Anybody else want to jump in? All right. Not seeing anyone. Well, any either report outs or any additional discussion items, just kind of want to open up the floor for anybody. If anyone's got anything for us or for the group. All right. Let's see if anyone put anything in the chat. If there's nothing additional, I guess we'll belabor this and we can let out a little bit early, give you guys about 20 minutes back in your day. So just wanted to note that the next meeting is coming up on November 15th. That's a Tuesday. So thanks so much, everyone, for joining the call today and sticking with it until the bitter end. Really appreciate all you, and thanks so much to our presenters, Kat, Becky, and Brian. And look forward to seeing you all in November. So have a great rest of your day. Take care.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank